Welcome to Midnight Grove, where stories remind us of the journeys that shape us. Tonight's tale, The Borrowed Bicycle, follows Rosa, a girl who struggles to find her place in a new town until she discovers an abandoned bicycle that changes everything. But when she learns it still belongs to someone, she must face the truth, navigate unexpected friendships, and find the confidence to make her mark. Settle in, relax, and let this story take you on a ride of self-discovery and belonging. Chapter 1. The Bicycle in the Shed. Rosa had never felt more out of place. Moving to a new town was supposed to be an adventure, or at least that's what her mother had told her. But as Rosa walked home from school, her backpack weighing down her shoulders, all she felt was loneliness. She missed their old neighborhood, the familiar streets where she knew every crack in the sidewalk, the park where she and her best friend Lena had spent hours racing their bikes. But now Lena was miles away, and Rosa was stuck in Maplewood, a town where she had no friends, no sense of belonging, and worst of all, no bike. Her mother had promised they'd get a new one once they settled in, but money was tight. A bike was a luxury, not a necessity. Still, as Rosa trudged past rows of identical houses, she felt a longing in her chest. She just wanted to feel free again, to fly down the streets with the wind in her hair, to have something that made this new place feel like home. That's when she saw it. Behind the house at the end of the block, half hidden by an overgrown hedge, stood a small weathered shed. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, leaning against the wall, was an old bicycle. Rosa's breath caught. The frame was coated in dust, the tires slightly deflated, but the bike itself was beautiful, deep blue with silver handlebars and a sturdy frame that looked like it had once carried someone on countless adventures. She took a hesitant step forward. Was it abandoned, forgotten, or did it still belong to someone? Her fingers itched to touch it. No one was around. Would it really hurt to take just one ride? The first ride. Rosa glanced toward the house. The windows were dark, the driveway empty. It looked abandoned, or at least like no one had been there for a while. She stepped inside the shed, running her fingers over the handlebars. The metal was cold, but beneath the dust it still held a faint shine. Her heart pounded as she wheeled it out into the sunlight. The tires were soft, but not completely flat. The chain was a little stiff, but it still moved when she spun the pedals. Rosa bit her lip. Just one ride. Swinging her leg over the seat, she pressed down on the pedals. The bike wobbled at first, unused to movement after who knew how long, but after a few shaky rotations, it steadied. Then suddenly she was flying. The moment the wind hit her face, all her worries melted away. The weight of being the new girl, the awkwardness of sitting alone at lunch, the ache of missing Lena, it all disappeared as the world blurred past her. She rode through the quiet streets, feeling the thrill of speed, of movement, of freedom. It was like a piece of her old life had come back, filling the empty space in her heart. For the first time since moving to Maplewood, Rosa felt like herself again, a borrowed secret. When she finally slowed, her legs were shaking with excitement. She coasted to a stop near her house, her breath coming fast. She should return the bike, she knew that. But as she looked at it, at the way the sunlight gleamed off the frame, at how perfectly it fit her, she couldn't bring herself to do it. No one had touched it in ages. It had been abandoned, forgotten. Wouldn't it be better for someone to use it, rather than let it rust in a shed? A tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered that it wasn't hers. But another voice, the one that missed home, that longed for something familiar, told her she needed it. "I'll bring it back," she promised the bike, as if that made it okay. Just for a little while. And with that, she wheeled it behind her house, out of sight. A new routine. The next few days, Rosa lived for the moments she could slip away and ride. She explored new streets, mapped out the best shortcuts through town, and even found a quiet park with winding trails where she could go as fast as she wanted without worrying about cars. At school, things were still awkward, but the bike gave her something to look forward to, until the day she heard a name that made her stomach drop. James used to live in that house. A girl in her math class, Leah, said, pointing toward the house at the end of the street. His family moved last summer. Rosa's heart pounded. James? Yeah, he was kinda quiet, but nice. I think he left some stuff behind when they moved. Leah shrugged. Why? Rosa forced a smile. No reason. But inside, panic twisted her stomach. James. The bike belonged to James. And if he ever came back for it, he would realize it was missing. The unexpected encounter. That afternoon, Rosa couldn't stop thinking about what she had done. She had convinced herself that the bike had been abandoned, that no one would miss it. But now she knew the truth. It belonged to someone. And she had taken it. Her fingers tightened on the handlebars as she rode home, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew what she had to do. She had to return it. But just as she turned onto her street, she froze. A boy was standing in front of the house at the end of the block. Tall, with dark hair and a thoughtful expression, he looked around the yard like he was searching for something. Rosa's breath caught. James. Her hands tightened on the handlebars. Did he know? Had someone told him? Then, as if sensing her gaze, James turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his gaze flickered down to the bike. Rosa's stomach dropped. He knew. A silent understanding. Rosa's heart pounded as James took a step toward her. That's my bike, he said slowly, his voice uncertain. Rosa swallowed, guilt hitting her like a tidal wave. I didn't think anyone lived here anymore, she blurted. I found it in the shed and it looked like no one was using it, and I just... She stopped, realizing how ridiculous it sounded. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. I guess it's good to see someone riding it, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I left in a hurry when we moved. I always wondered if it was still here. Rosa stared at him. You're not mad? James shrugged. Maybe a little surprised, but mostly just glad it didn't go to waste. Relief flooded through her. She reached for the handlebars. Here, it's yours. James hesitated. You like riding it?" Rosa nodded. James glanced at the bike, then at Rosa. "Then keep it," he said. "I think it found the right person." Rosa's breath caught. "Are you sure?" James smiled. "Yeah, just promise me you'll take good care of it." Rosa grinned. "I will." And just like that, the borrowed bicycle became hers for real this time. Chapter 2, The Ride Home. The wind carried the scent of summer rain as Rosa rode through the quiet streets of Maplewood, her heart still racing from her conversation with James. She had expected anger, maybe even accusations, but instead James had done something Rosa never imagined. He had let her keep the bike. Not because he didn't care about it, not because he had forgotten about it, but because he saw how much she loved it. Rosa's fingers tightened on the handlebars, her mind buzzing with the weight of it all. She had spent weeks convincing herself that the bike had been abandoned. Now she had to face the truth. She had taken something that wasn't hers, and somehow she had been given a second chance. As she neared her house, her thoughts swirled with emotions she couldn't quite untangle. Gratitude, guilt, relief, and something else. Something that felt like the beginning of something new, an unexpected friendship. The next morning, Rosa found herself hesitating as she passed James's house on her way to school. The shutters were open now and the front door was propped ajar. A moving van sat in the driveway, boxes stacked neatly along the porch. James was back. Rosa swallowed hard, her feet dragging a little slower. Would he think she had only been nice to him because of the bike? Would things be weird now? But before she could spiral any further, a voice called out, "Hey, Rosa!" She turned to see James standing by the porch, hands in his pockets. His expression was casual, like they had been friends for years, instead of awkward acquaintances thrown together by a stolen bike. Rosa hesitated, then gave him a small smile. "Hey." James motioned toward the moving van. "Want to help me unpack?" The invitation caught her off guard. "Really?" He shrugged. "You already borrowed my bike, might as well make yourself useful." Rosa laughed, the last of her nerves melting away. "Fine, but I'm not lifting anything heavier than a toaster." James smirked. "Deal." And just like that, Rosa had her first real friend in Maplewood. 2 riders. Over the next few weeks, Rosa and James fell into an easy rhythm. They rode together after school, exploring streets Rosa hadn't dared to go alone. James introduced her to the best shortcut to the park, the quietest spot by the lake, and the one hill that made for the most exhilarating ride downhill. Rosa learned that James had moved back because his parents had decided they missed the small-town life. He had spent the last year in a big city, stuck in a school where no one talked to him and everything moved too fast. "I thought I'd be glad to come back," James admitted one afternoon as they rested at the top of the hill. "But now it's weird. It's like I left, but the town stayed the same." Rosa understood that feeling all too well. "You'll find your place again," she said. "Took me a while too." James gave her a grateful smile. "Thanks, and for what it's worth, and I'm glad you found my bike." Rosa grinned. "Me too." An unwelcome discovery. One afternoon, as they were locking up their bikes outside the corner store, a voice sneered behind them. "Didn't know you were the type to steal things, Rosa." She turned, her stomach sinking. It was Caleb Miller, one of the older boys from school. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his smirk full of mean-spirited amusement. Rosa bristled. "I didn't steal anything." Caleb tilted his head. "That's not what I heard. People say you took that bike from James's old house. Pretty bold move for the new kid." Rosa's pulse quickened. "James let me keep it." Caleb scoffed. "Sure he did." James stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "Actually, I did." Caleb blinked. "Wait, seriously?" James nodded. "Yeah, and unless you want to talk about how you threw my lunch in the trash in 7th grade, maybe don't act like you care about what's mine." Rosa bit back a laugh as Caleb's face turned red. He muttered something under his breath before stalking off. As soon as he was out of earshot, Rosa turned to James wide-eyed. "You never told me about the lunch thing." James smirked. Didn't seem relevant. Rosa laughed. "Remind me to never get on your bad side." James grinned. "Deal." A test of trust. One afternoon, after a long ride through the park, James suggested they switch bikes for the trip home. Rosa blinked. "What? Why?" But then she saw the look on his face. Curious, but also a little hopeful. He had trusted her with his bike when he didn't have to. Maybe it was time to do the same. "Okay," Rosa said, stepping off. "But if you crash it, I'm keeping your bike." James grinned. Fair trade. As they rode off, Rosa couldn't help but laugh. His bike was completely different from hers, lighter, faster, harder to control, but there was something freeing about the exchange, like it was proof that this friendship was real. For the first time since moving to Maplewood, Rosa felt completely at home. The unexpected goodbye. The summer was ending, and with it the easy, carefree days of riding for hours without a destination. One evening, as the sky turned golden, James called Rosa with unexpected news. "My parents decided we're moving again." Rosa felt the words hit her like a punch to the stomach. "What?" James sighed. "They got a job offer back in the city. We leave in 2 weeks." Rosa was silent, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles ached. She had spent so long feeling like the new kid, like she didn't belong. And now, just when she had finally found her place, she was losing the one person who had made Maplewood feel like home. "Wow," she said finally, "that's sudden." James hesitated. "Yeah, but I'm glad we had this summer." Rosa swallowed hard. "Me too." A gift and a promise. The night before James left, he knocked on Rosa's door, holding something behind his back. "I have something for you," he said. He stepped aside to reveal a new bike. It wasn't brand new, but it was sturdy, sleek, and had the same blue frame as the one she had borrowed all those months ago. Rosa's breath caught. "James," he smiled, "you can't keep riding my old bike forever." Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. James shrugged. "Just promise me you'll keep riding." Rosa grinned. "I promise." As James walked away, Rosa ran her fingers over the handlebars of her new bike. She had borrowed a bicycle, but in return, she had found something even more important. A friend, a home, and a road ahead that for the first time didn't feel so lonely. Chapter 3, The Road Ahead. The morning James left, Rosa rode her bike for hours. She didn't have a destination. She just pedaled, the wind rushing past her face, her thoughts tangled like the swirling leaves on the pavement. She told herself she wasn't sad. People left all the time, that was just life. But deep down she knew that wasn't true. She wasn't just losing James. She was losing the person who had made Maplewood feel like home. And no matter how fast she rode, she couldn't escape that truth. A town that feels different. The first week without James was strange. Rosa still passed his house on her way to school, but now the windows were dark, the yard empty. Lunch felt lonelier. Their usual bike rides after school had become solo journeys. She tried to act normal, but even her mom noticed something was off. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" her mom asked one evening as they sat on the porch. Rosa shrugged. "Yeah." Her mom gave her a knowing look. "You miss James, don't you?" Rosa hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah." Her mom smiled gently. "That just means he was a good friend." Rosa looked down at her hands. "I know, I just thought maybe this time something would stay the same." Her mom's expression softened. "Change is hard, but it doesn't mean things are over. The people who matter, they stay with you no matter where they are." Rosa wanted to believe that, but she wasn't sure how. The challenge. 2 weeks later, something happened that Rosa never expected. She was locking up her bike outside the corner store when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, well, look who it is. Still riding that stolen bike?" Rosa turned, her stomach sinking. "Caleb." She narrowed her eyes. "For the last time, I didn't steal it." Caleb smirked. "Sure, but now that James is gone, who's gonna back you up?" Rosa clenched her jaw. "I don't need anyone to back me up." Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You know," he said, "there's a race next weekend, the Maplewood Loop. Bet you wouldn't stand a chance." Rosa frowned. "So?" Caleb shrugged. "So if you really belong here, prove it." The challenge hung in the air. Rosa knew what he was doing, trying to get under her skin. But part of her wanted to take the bait. Not for Caleb, for herself, for everything this bike had come to mean, for the person she was still becoming. Training alone. Rosa had never done a bike race before, and she had no idea how to prepare. James would have known. She thought about calling him, but something inside her stopped her. This was her challenge. She had to do this on her own. So she trained the only way she knew how, riding every day, pushing herself to go faster, to take corners sharper, to climb hills without slowing down. The Maplewood Loop was 6 miles, twisting roads, sudden turns, steep inclines. The first time she tried the route, she nearly quit halfway through. The second time she made it to the finish, but felt like her lungs were on fire. The third time, something changed. She wasn't just riding. She was racing, and she wasn't afraid anymore. Race day. The morning of the race was cool and crisp. the sky painted in soft oranges and pinks. The town square buzzed with energy, banners fluttering, kids on bikes weaving through the crowd, adults chatting as they sipped coffee from paper cups. Rosa stood at the starting line, gripping her handlebars. Caleb was a few spots down, smirking at her. She ignored him. This race wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about proving something to herself. The whistle blew, and they were off. The race. The first mile was easy. Flat roads, smooth pavement. The second mile, harder. A sharp turn, a steep incline. Rosa gritted her teeth, pushing harder. Caleb was ahead, but not by much. She kept her eyes on the road. Halfway through, the race became a blur of motion. Legs burning, wind whipping past her, the sound of tires against asphalt. By mile 5, she had caught up to Caleb. By mile 6, they were side by side. And as they neared the final stretch, Rosa did something she never thought she could. She passed him. The finish line was right there. With one last burst of speed, she flew forward and crossed first, the winner's circle. The moment she stopped, her chest heaving, she heard the cheers. People clapping, calling her name. She had done it. She had won. Caleb skidded to a stop beside her, his face red. For a moment he just stared at her. Then, to her complete shock, he gave her a nod. Not bad, new kid. And with that he walked off. Rosa blinked. Did Caleb just respect her? She shook her head, laughing to herself. Maybe Maplewood wasn't so bad after all. A message from James. That night, Rosa sat on her porch, staring at the sunset, her medal resting in her lap. Then her phone buzzed. A message from James. James, heard you won the race. Guess I shouldn't be surprised. Rosa grinned. Rosa, you taught me well. James, nah, you did that on your own. Rosa's chest tightened, but in a good way. He was right. She had done this. For herself, for everything this town had become to her, for the road ahead. The ride continues. The next morning, Rosa got on her bike, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was going to keep riding, no matter where the road took her. Thank you for joining us at Midnight Grove for the borrowed bicycle. Rosa's story reminds us that sometimes the things we borrow, friendships, opportunities, even courage, help us grow into who we're meant to be. And in the end, we make them our own. As you drift off to sleep, may you carry with you the warmth of this story and the belief that every new beginning is a chance to find your place. Sleep well, and we'll see you next time for another heartfelt bedtime story.